All right, I think we are live and direct here. I hope y'all can hear me. Welcome to Loud and Clear with Glenn Schick, that's me, where we talk about mastering, audio production, and the things that actually make records translate in the real world. I'm Glenn Schick, a mastering engineer with, 32 years of work. So today is a lovely day here in Reykjavik, Iceland. We are in summer, which is just not the bad weather. It's the good weather. So very happy for that. And other than that, we are at episode 6 of Loud and Clear. And today we're going to be discussing something near and dear to my heart. It's the Audeze LCD-5S Deep Dive with Chris Berens from Audeze. So we're going to discuss what changes have happened with the 5 from the previous 5S and who this is for. And I also want to just kind of give you my disclaimer ahead of time that Audeze sent me these LCD-5Ss to evaluate, but they have no editorial oversight here, and we have not discussed what my review will entail. So my thoughts, good or bad, aren't entirely my own, and my priority today is going to be to just empower you with information before you part with your hard-earned cash. So with that said, I'm going to bring in, we have Chris Berens from Audeze. Welcome, Chris. Uh-oh, I'm not hearing you. Hold on. Can you say something?
How about now?
There we go. Yeah. All right.
That's weird. Okay, it muted, but it didn't unmute when you brought me back. So great to be here. Thank you, Glenn.
This is
Great
the fun
intro.
of
I have
live
a question about
streams.
your introduction. What is this real world that you mentioned?
The real world is, honestly, there's a bunch of YouTubers that kind of broadcast a bunch of info that I think is not based in reality. And I'm not going to name names or anything at this point, but I think if you work for a living and you have credits that are out there and you can see who's real and who's not real, that's the real world. So we're talking about working people and people aspiring to become working people. So
cool. Okay, I like that version of the real world. Count me in.
Okay, you're in here. So
if you'll have me, yeah.
We'll have you, Chris.
Always the
It's all
question.
good. So I guess the first question here, besides why'd you make these orange copper color, and these are the new LCD-5Ss, and they are different from the LCD-5s, the previous model. You can see in the color and in some details here. We can't show you the drivers out here yet, but we'll discuss that. So I guess the first question is, why do these things exist? What's the reason? You had an LCD-5.
Right. Yeah. So LCD-5, we're very proud of it. Obviously, it's a great product. Over the time that it's been out, I think we released it in 2022. I can't remember exactly. But since its release, we've made some technological advancements. We've made some realizations. We've listened to feedback from consumers, people who use them, people who tried them, people who own them. And, we kind of make changes based on that. It's kind of always how we've done things. We try to evolve as a company. Sometimes that just means we continually update the models that are current and don't change the name. But every once in a while, something comes along that we feel like is kind of a big deal. And that makes us change the model number or model name. So in the case of LCD-5S, and I have my own pair here, which you'll notice has the copper rings, but doesn't have the copper grills or the other copper parts. That's because this was my original pair of LCD-5s that engineering converted for me before we had the copper parts. So they're current production drivers, current ear pads, slam rings, all that, but they don't have the copper accents. The copper accents, though, I think are beautiful. I kind of miss them on this pair. I think it really adds to the look of it, and that's really the only reason we did it. I think it ties in really well to the sort of tortoise shell look of those acetate rings, and it brings out some of the depth and the transparency of it, which it's a lot easier to see in person than it is on a video screen. But it was purely cosmetic in that case, just to differentiate the models and kind of tie in with the slam ring. More importantly, inside, we made 3 what I consider to be major changes in how they perform. And I can talk about each one of those and what they bring to the table and what that adds up to in the overall picture.
So I guess a couple things before we get to that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get feedback specifically from just general users of the 5, or was it from mixing and mastering engineers? Was
Everybody.
it everybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
everybody who gives us feedback, we always listen.
Okay.
So it's and it comes from all different sources. Sometimes it's email, sometimes we just see it in a review somewhere, and sometimes it's talking to people, professionals like yourself, or listeners, at trade shows, Can Jam, whatever. We're always listening, and every one of us who kind of represents and goes to these things and checks these things out, we're always kind of gathering information and sharing it with relevant folks. So that's kind of how we like to exist. I mean, to me, it's a good model to how to live as a human, and I'm really proud that we do that as a business.
Yeah, I've enjoyed dealing with you guys as people and a company. You've always been really responsive, and as a professional, I really appreciate all that. So thank you.
Yay, we work hard on that, and we're basically just a bunch of nerds like everybody else. I mean, I love music. I create music. I do a little bit of kind of hobbyist level work in pro audio. I kind of speak the language. And I grew up in a house with an audiophile music playing dad. And that's how a lot of us are. We love it. It's a passion driven business. That's one of our 3 guiding principles.
And just to clarify, your position at Audeze is artist relations, correct?
Artist and industry relations.
Ah,
I spend a lot of time talking about our products, and gathering feedback about them, and helping people decide, what, if any, of our models might be the best one for their particular use. So yeah, product education is really kind of the name of the game for me right now.
okay. So a couple things. Let's talk about, first of all, when I put these on, they felt different than the LCD-5s. Did you change the ear cups, and is the weight the same?
Okay, the weight is a little bit more, and we didn't change the actual ear cup rings, but we did add the slam ring, which is that copper part that goes around here. So we added this slam, and that adds a little bit of weight, and it actually adds a little bit of depth. So it pulls actually the ear pad away from the driver a little bit more. So there's a little more space inside
Gotcha.
here because of that. And the other thing we did, which I think is even more impactful on the fit and the seal, is we changed the slope and the shape of the ear pad on the inside. So we added a little more gentle slope, particularly at the back. So you get a better seal around the back side of your ear on more different head shapes.
We all need a good seal on the backside.
Yes, for sure. No puns intended there, right? But yeah, so that helps with fit and also sound.
Right.
And the slam is also a big part of the difference in sound, which I'm sure we'll get into momentarily, but I'll let you lead that.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect kind of lead in here, because one of the things that I noticed when I was looking over the headphone, and I've heard this slam technology mentioned before, I didn't know exactly what it was, but I saw the driver. It almost looks like it has like a thing going across it, which I think it does actually.
It does.
And
That's the
you know,
third thing that we changed that I haven't yet talked about. But
Yeah,
yeah.
so I
Mhm.
noticed it looked different, and obviously there's definitely some differences in sound, which we'll discuss. But tell us, what is SLAM?
SLAM is an acronym for Symmetric Linear Acoustic Modulator. And which is a little bit silly in terms of what it's actually saying, but really what it is, it's kind of very much like something called a Helmholtz resonator, which is kind of the principle upon which horn-based loudspeaker systems tend to work.
Right.
There's some relationship to transmission lines and that kind of stuff too. But basically what it is it's a channel that vents and runs around the outside of the diaphragm. So you'll see on the top and on the bottom of the slam ring, there's a port.
I
And
did
that
notice
port
that.
goes, that's the sort of outside termination of a channel that runs around on the inside and then connects to the driver chamber underneath that mesh there. Or actually on top of the mesh. It joins the inside world of the seal around your head to the outside world
Okay.
in a way that essentially it doesn't let sound out or in, but it helps with equalizing the pressure on both sides of the diaphragm, and it increases the volume of the airspace. So here's where we get into the resonator part, the horn part.
Got it.
It does something very similar in practical terms to what adding a well-tuned subwoofer does in a room with speakers. So it extends the low end, and we tune it to each model. So the SLAM system on Carbon 2 is different from the SLAM system on LCD-5S, which is also different from the SLAM system on Maxwell 2, which is what I'm talking to you on.
Right.
Those all three have SLAM, and LCD S20 is the fourth one now. So we have 4 models now that have SLAM involved. Each one is tuned to the specific model. So when you look at the frequency response curve, and I'm a visual person, so I'll do this visually, you see some roll off in the low end at some point, right?
Right.
And so what we do is we tune that SLAM to bring that low end back up to a deeper extension, which is similar to what you would do with a subwoofer, and then provide the right kind of cue and overlap so that it adds low end weight in a very natural and palpable way. But the byproduct of this, which we kind of found after we started playing around with it, was that it also helps, and subwoofers do the same thing, it helps in all the regions above where it's working. So it actually helps equalize or level out the frequency response. And it helps with imaging and kind of makes the job of the driver in general easier to do.
Right. So in other words, like these channels here, it's not to put your screwdriver in and pry off your
No,
your
don't
ear
do
cups,
that.
right?
No,
Okay, I'll
yeah. It's
try
not an
not to.
access point for tools, for sure.
And I did actually notice, I think this is the first headphone I've had with SLAM, and one of my, I guess, pet peeves I had with the 5s compared to the 5Ss was the low end on it. And coming from
Same.
the 4s, which I really love the low end of the 4s, but the 4s are like huge, and besides also being huge, they're kind of they're a softer, more pleasant kind of listening headphone, but not as detailed as either the 5s or the 5S to me. And the first thing I noticed when I put on the 5Ss was, oh, the bass is back again. So it was a welcome addition, I would say. So,
Yeah, and that was, that totally lines up with my thoughts exactly, and with the feedback that we got from everybody who shared with us, basically. And of the people that I've heard from that now have 5Ss and had 5s before, either currently or previously, the feedback has been pretty much unanimous on loving the low end. Yeah.
all right.
So that's mostly the SLAM, but also partly the ear pad shape.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because I'm sure you're aware, it's just like when you're mixing or mastering, small moves in multiple places make big changes. And so everything we do, from the distance from the diaphragm to your ear, the distance apart between the magnets themselves or the magnets and the diaphragm, everything we do, the shape of the ear pad, how much foam is in it, all that stuff, everything we do adds up to changes.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as far as the volume, because you said there's more volume now between the ear cup and the actual driver, does that change like where the standing waves are in there? And does it change where the bass actually has cancellation?
Yes. And that's, just to clarify, we're talking about volume of air, not volume of sound level, not
Yes.
SPL, right?
Yeah.
just so where everybody knows. So yeah, it added more air into the chamber. So it's sort of like going from I'm a guitar player, so my analogy is always guitars, right? It's like going from an OM model guitar to a Dreadnought, maybe, where it's the fundamentals the same, the note is the same, everything's the same, but because you have a slightly bigger body, you have a little more air chamber, a little more vibration resonance, you get a deeper low end, and everything again adding up to standing waves, blah blah blah. We still have the same kind of approach to LCD-5S that we had with LCD-5, and that is reduce those resonances as much as possible, but in this case we do it without decreasing the bass. So we don't find that there's much in the way of, I don't know that we have a way to measure actual standing waves inside that small space. Probably in the low end there's really nothing, because the waveforms need feet
of course,
reach their full potential, right? But because you're vibrating your head, it makes a difference. And essentially it's allowing for more air to act upon your bone structure and your eardrum.
Right. So the 5S, it's got more booty.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
All that's a very nerdy way to say exactly that. More booty.
So as far as like mid-range,
but it's
now,
tight booty, realistic booty, direct booty. It's not like a big lumbering giant.
Well, I
It can
think
still fit through a turnstile. Let's just say that, into the subway.
It's different booty than your other booty that you had from like things like your fours. So I think the biggest takeaway for me was like, it felt like this one kind of, I really heard a lot more sub bass than I heard kind of before, and even compared to the fours, which I love the bass, and the 5S's kind of feel like they're kind of tuned to that sub stuff, which is so prevalent in like today's music, especially like EDM and hip hop and any modern style music. So I really felt like I could tune in super easy to that sub stuff.
Good. That's great feedback, and aligns with what we've heard from other people and what I hear in my listening as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So all very good things. And that's really, I think Slam is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, innovation that we've come up with in our time as a company. I think it's just such a big deal, and we're very proud of it, and we're talking about it, and explaining it's a little bit hard. A lot of people just think that, oh, they just boosted the bass. It's not really, I mean, yeah, but there's way more to it than that. It's much more nuanced and in depth than that. It's not like we just went, here's a shelf.
Good. Yeah. I wasn't expecting it to be good, but it actually kind of was. So it was a nice surprise.
And partly I think because of the name that they came up with for this, which I like the name, but it was really hard to name this thing, because it gives a little bit of the impression that there is that sort of maybe artificial bass boost that people might expect from the name, but it's to me, there's nothing artificial about it. It just feels so natural and real.
Now with extra booty, yes.
No pads. No, just 100% authentic booty.
So let's talk a little about mid-range, because here's the honest truth. When I came to Audeze, and I put on the 5s, the original model here, and I remember sitting in your office and going, wow, these are different. And it wasn't like I was different in a good way. It was just, these are different. And the mid-range was kind of pokey, and especially around like 3K, I found it had kind of a little bump.
How are you reading my mind on all this stuff, Glenn? That was exactly my thought.
Yeah. So,
and I found the original LCD-5 a little bit fatiguing because of that, and I didn't end up using it that much.
I got used to that mid-range bump, and in mastering, having that mid-range detail is really important. A lot of guys use you're familiar with ATC speakers.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of mastering rooms have ATC speakers, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but they do have a great mid-range. And the ATCs also kind of accentuated, I think, a little bit of that mid-range where you could work on it. It's maybe not the most pleasant way to work, but you can get all the details you need and adjust whatever you need to. And that's kind of the way I felt about the fives. Was, yeah, I can work on these after I kind of got used to the different balance in the voicing, but it wasn't pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you. And, you know, you coming from LCD4, which was almost the exact inverse in the mid-range response of
Yeah.
LCD5. Like we just went from one extreme to the other, right? Which I think was overall a good change, but it came on so kind of severely and suddenly in the flagship region that, and I think it was just we kind of swung the pendulum a little bit too far the other way. So now with LCD5S, as you're probably getting to, we swung it back a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The other thing that I noticed also is that, is this my imagination, or does it have actually a little more high end without it being pushed or stressed? Like I feel like I can hear, higher frequencies easier, but not stressed. They're not strident or, kind of stressed at all. But I feel like I hear a little better, or maybe it's just the voicing or balance. But maybe you can tell me.
Yeah. Okay. Here's where we get into that third thing that you sort of mentioned, because part of what you're talking about is actually part because of SLAM. Part of it's because of the ear pads, and part of it is because we redesigned the diaphragm frame and the diaphragm itself. Not the material, but just the way everything is structured. So there's actually, as you can see when you look inside there in the right light, there's a little crossbar that goes diagonally across the diaphragm. So the diaphragm frame, instead of having just one opening like this, it has the opening, but it also has a crossbar that goes across. And this is something that we developed for Carbon 2, the electrostatic. And it really helps in several different ways. One of those ways is that it levels off the frequency response in the upper mid-range and kind of evens things out a little bit more. And it adds treble extension a very little bit, but you know, this is what we're talking about, right? It's all about subtleties. And it actually reduces distortion around, I think engineering told me it was something like 7K. There used to be a little bit more distortion that's now leveled off.
That's
And
kind
I
of
tell
maybe
this
why I'm
story.
hearing things cleaner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I tell this
yeah.
story about, you know, when I went to engineering and I listened to the kind of like final production or pre-production samples of LCD5S, which were very much like mine, converted from LCD5s, you know. And in fact, I brought my pair of LCD5 with me to engineering and said, I want to hear the latest because I knew they'd made some changes. I had already heard SLAM and I'd already heard the new ear pads. But what they said was, okay, you need to hear this because we did something that we did with Carbon 2 where we changed the diaphragm frame and added that little section in the middle. And it actually reduced a little bit of distortion that we didn't even know was there. So I listened and it was like, wow, it's like, you know, like when you think your windows are clean, but you
Right.
clean them anyway, and you go, whoa, okay, there's some smudging and smearing that's now gone that I didn't even notice before. Bang.
Yeah.
That was exactly what it is, just in auditory terms. Like it just comes across as more water clear, a
Yeah.
little less hazy.
Yep. I
Not that the
agree.
original 5 was hazy,
No,
but
the original 5 was just more strident, like I said. It
yeah,
had,
it's a change
it,
that you don't notice until it's gone.
yeah.
You
This
know,
this this kind of feels like what this should have been from day one, honestly. And did you actually go out of your way to keep anything from the fives, or is everything pretty much a redesign at this point?
well, the outer chassis and everything is pretty much the same. The headband's the same.
Mhm.
All the exterior parts, other than the ear pads, and the part of the SLAM system that you can see, that's all the same. So,
Right.
and of course the copper color is different,
Right.
but the rings themselves, I don't think they really altered. No changes to the yokes or the headband.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, besides that, I think, there's a bunch of pros that are using these now. Besides myself who, use headphones 80 or 90% of the time. And, I've got some lovely speakers right here, and I'm in a treated room and all that. But I find that the speakers, as good as they can get, always depend on your room, and no room is perfect. So I'm on these a lot. And I know some of my friends like Justin Perkins and Stefan Brown, and I don't know him, but I know he's been using it, is Dale Becker. And I'm seeing these a lot in the wild now. Are you finding they're getting the acceptance you've hoped for?
Oh yeah, I mean, all
Yeah.
three of those guys that you just mentioned went from LCD-5 to 5S, and they all three pretty much said better in every way.
Yeah.
To the extent where, and Stefan Brown even said, like, I got the 5S's and this is the first headphone I've ever had where I don't feel like I need to EQ them.
Yeah.
He
got the early model.
he would kind of lower the upper mid range on the LCD-5 and boost the bass, but he doesn't do anything like that with the LCD-5S. So we're very, very happy and proud about this.
Yep. Well, I love them so far, and I've been using them like crazy. I mastered a couple already, big records on them, and it's been great. So I'm going to talk more about like some of the, I would say, applications and mixing, mastering, that type of stuff. And if you want to chime in. I'm going to smallen you a little here on the window.
Cool.
Let's see if I can do that. Can I make you smaller? Oh, I took you away. Hold on. I took us both away. Let's go back. Oh, there we go. All right.
Okay.
So, cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I use headphones over speakers most of the time, with micro details like with mastering. The little tiny moves, like 1/10 of a dB moves, are just really, you can get much better perception on those than you can when you're using a pair of speakers. Compression changes, you can hear so much easier when you're doing that type of stuff. And stereo image, and this is something we need to talk about. With stereo imaging, when you're working, mixing, or mastering, you really need to kind of keep in mind that headphones are not the same as speakers. So they will kind of exaggerate where speakers will feel with stereo panning. So you want to kind of go subtle if you're working on headphones compared to working on speakers. A lot of guys, when they make the switch, will kind of pan everything exactly like they used to do with their speakers. And that's kind of a mistake, in my opinion. So be careful with the panning. Can you use these as like a primary monitoring? Absolutely. I'm not the only one now that's doing this primarily, and I've been working on headphones. I got my first pair in 2018, and the first project I did was a #1 record. So, can you work on these exclusively? Do you need them as a backup for speakers? You can work on headphones exclusively. It's not the days of yore where people will look down on you for doing that. There's no more stigma to it, and the headphones themselves have gotten so much better that I highly recommend you definitely check out a pair. As far as these versus other headphones, and Chris, feel free to chime in on any of this too. So these are their Flagship, and for me, spending the money that these cost, which is what they retail, I think, for $4,500 or something, it's not cheap. But I also see the same people who complain about spending, under $5,000 for what could be the most important decision you're going to make in mixing and mastering. They'll go out and buy a $6,000 compressor that they use once every 2 months, and then end up having it sit in the rack. And they don't complain about that at all. But for some reason, there's another stigma attached to spending more than a few $100s on a pair of headphones, which I think is ridiculous. So
I'm so glad you brought that up, Glenn, because I think about that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's something that, in the days of old, you bought a pair of headphones. It was, an expensive pair was a few $100s, and that was, ooh, you spent a few $100 on headphones. And now you're in a paradigm where the headphones become your room. People spend thousands and thousands of dollars, tuning and tweaking and treating their rooms, way more than a pair of headphones cost. And in reality, these are going to probably give you better results 99% of the time, unless you had like some great room designer, or by chance you got a room with great exact dimensions, which is not likely, than if you were going to spend that money somewhere else. So uh, don't be afraid of the price. But if you are on a budget that you can't afford this, there are other options. So for me, the next headphone that I kind of recommend after this, if you can't afford this, would be something like an MM500, which is a lower model on the Audeze line. It's not their starter one. It's the Manny Marroquin model. And I think honestly, it punches above its weight. Uh, I'm not going to say it's as good as the 5S's, but I was really shocked at how much I liked them, and I could easily work on these. So if you can't spend that kind of cash, there are other options. Some people like the LCD X's. I heard the earlier LCD X's, and I got to say, Chris, sorry, I was not a fan. But I've heard they've changed the voicing, so at one point I'll hear the new ones and see if they're better. But for me, the MM500s would be a great option if you can't afford those. But what about if you own an LCD-X or an MM500? Do you need to upgrade? What would you normally tell somebody, Chris?
Well, that's a personal decision is
Hmm.
usually my answer.
Yep,
You have to kind of let your pocketbook and your desires guide that decision. Sometimes the best headphone for a particular person is not the most expensive one. You know,
absolutely.
we have and it's about 50-50 on LCD-X versus MM500. And this is in the mastering world as well as mixing and everything. Um,
Yeah, I know some people that
yeah, so
love their LCD-Xs, but
yeah, it's a total personal choice. Everybody hears headphones very differently,
mhm.
especially basically there's these. Susan Rogers told me this. There's these little bones inside your ear near your earlobe that when you put on a pair of headphones, you don't use that bone in how you hear. You
Huh,
only use that in free space when you're listening to speakers. So
that's
and everybody's ear shape and head size and all this stuff really affects how they hear headphones. So everyone hears headphones very, very differently, which is why we like to say there's no such thing as flat.
right.
There's a flat headphone would sound awful to start with, but you can't just measure it like you can a speaker in an anechoic chamber and expect it to come out right. There's just too many things involved, too many variables.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Hmm.
And my thoughts on upgrading, if you're unsatisfied with what you're working with at the moment, then it merits an upgrade. If you're
Absolutely.
if you're
That's the call.
happy if you're happy with your, if you got a pair of MM500s, I would probably still use my MM500s because I like them. If you were unsatisfied in any shape, way, or form in where you're working, because this is your environment, then it's time for an upgrade, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's another thing too that I like to share with people who are asking about it. If you're having thoughts or doubts, or if you're getting notes on your work about like, hey, you missed this little detail, or I heard this, and can you cut that out? And then you go back and you go, oh yeah, I didn't notice that at first. That's maybe something to start thinking about, and maybe an upgrade is a good idea, or maybe even not an upgrade, maybe just a shift. And it could
Yeah.
even be a downward shift in terms of pricing, because there's, I think, $500 difference between MM500 and LCDX.
Hmm.
LCDX being the lower cost model, right?
Right.
Um, it doesn't necessarily mean that the more expensive one is the best. When people ask what's your best headphone, I have two answers depending on who they are and the mood I'm in at the time. My first answer is very glib, and that is, well, the most expensive one, of course. And that usually goes out to audiophiles and people with big blingy rings and watches. But that's not really an honest answer. The honest answer is whichever one works best for you.
Right.
That's really the answer. And it might be the most expensive one, or it might not.
Yeah, no, I think whatever makes those decisions easier for you to make, and what translates the best, what you trust versus what you don't trust,
Mhm.
will actually decide if you want to spend money on either buying or upgrading your current setup. So that's kind of everything I had today. Thanks, Chris, for sticking in for the whole live stream here,
A
and
great pleasure.
we appreciate all your info and advice. And if you got any questions, hit them in the chat, and I'll try to do my best to get back to you. So thanks, everybody. See you next week. And thank you, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. Take care.
Take care.